All right, good evening, everyone. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting is posted in the local papers and also in the lobby of this building. Tonight's proceedings are broadcast live on Channel 34 and also streamed live on YouTube and are available for restreaming on demand. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning that we have powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide a basis for official action. Any questions or comments should be limited to the issues of what the board can legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate for a courtroom should be maintained at all times. First on our agenda is our roll call.
Chair Wynn?
Here.
Vice Chair Brodoff?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Mr. Cook is excused. Councilor Schlager is excused. Ms. Willis?
Here.
Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally?
Here.
Ms. Lockman?
Here.
Mr. Barr?
Here.
Mr. Gilmer is excused.
We have minutes from our February 10th meeting.
Motion to pass with the changes proposed?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions?
I'm sorry. I think I was at that meeting.
Yes, it's one of the changes was to put you as attending that meeting. Sorry about that. Okay.
Okay. And that brings us to the application of M&M Tyler, LLC.
No. Do the resolution last after this?
Or
Or do you want to finish that up?
we don't have it on, was it?
It wasn't on the agenda. I thought maybe we could do it through at the committee section.
Okay.
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 Once again, I thought I was misreading the agenda. That's okay. All right. Good evening, Counselor.
Chairman Lynn, members of the board, Alan Trumbullack, appearing for the applicant M&M Pilot LLC.
Is your microphone on, Mr. Tremblak?
It is now.
All right.
Thank you. This is a continuation of the hearing which began at the January 27, 2020 meeting. And the relief we're seeking is site plan approval to expand the existing mixed-use building on this property, along with several variances and site plan waivers, most of which deal with parking. What I'd like to do tonight, we had essentially completed our presentation at the last meeting, but I would like to recall Paul Sionis for some supplemental testimony dealing with essentially two matters. It should be fairly brief. So, Paul, I understand you're still on the road?
Am I still on the road?
Yes. All right. Paul, did you prepare, I know an issue was raised, I think, at the last meeting by Mr. Rooney, I think, regarding a concern about the front building facade. And did you prepare a revised drawing?
Yes.
Okay. Can you perhaps hand that out to the board and then discuss the revision? Going to mark that too. Did you hand that out?
No.
Do that now. We'd also like to mark, I guess, as A14, a similar size drawing showing the existing facade so the board can compare the existing to the proposed new facade.
Nice.
want to review these two drawings and
Sure.
explain to the board what you've tried to do with the revised drawing?
Okay. So at the January 27th meeting, Mr. Rooney questioned changing the top of the parapet wall on this front elevation. And based on my testimony last month, there'll be a new third-floor dwelling at the front of the building with a recessed, with a terrace at this top floor of the building. So the front of the third floor will be recessed. And the applicant and his wife intend to occupy that dwelling unit. So the terrace floor will be,
This one?
I think we're short. I was short with the number of copies of that second. So, all right, as I was saying, the applicant intends to occupy the front apartment with that terrace. And in reconstructing this building, the terrace floor will be 20 inches higher than the roof of the existing building. So therefore, we have to raise the parapet in height to comply with the 42-inch requirement for minimum height above the terrace level. And also, the applicant asked to ensure that he and his wife have privacy on the terrace from Glenridge Avenue. So we've also made the design complementary to both the existing parapet. So one of those exhibits I passed out is the existing parapet wall with that round top. And then the other exhibit is the proposed parapet that's complementary to the original parapet, both on the left and right side on the facade. But then the center utilizes the parabolic design that the applicant intends to use on the side elevations of the building. So this is to better describe the change to the parapet wall, the brick parapet wall. And then
Is that-
go over into the parking.
Anything
Yeah.
else? Okay. The second issue I would like you to address relates to the parking availability. Have you contacted any township officials to discuss the parking deck to be constructed on what's currently the Midtown parking lot?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and who did you speak with, and what were the substance of those
Well,
conversations?
following the last planning board meeting in January, with the discussion about the Midtown parking deck, I contacted and met with Township Attorney Ira Karasik to find out what the plans were for the Midtown parking deck, because that was questioned at the last planning board meeting. So this is pretty similar to what's repeated in Janice Talley's memo dated February 19th that was distributed to each planning board meeting. Your memo, yes. So as is repeated in Janice's memo of February 19th, the future deck is to contain 315 parking spaces on 5 levels. None of the spaces in the new deck are allocated for the Seymour Street project on the south side of Bloomfield Avenue, as all of the parking for the Seymour Street project will be on the south side of Bloomfield Avenue. So this is both in Janice's memo and also confirmed in my discussion with Township Attorney Ira Karasik. Construction of the deck is scheduled to begin immediately after.
Just for the record.
Sure.
Planner, there is some dispute over that by one of the former board members who sat in the negotiations on what that parking actually should be, and I think that will be addressed. It doesn't really affect your, but there was a belief that there should have been more available public parking in that original, in the deck on the south side.
South side, yes. Thank you. So with the Midtown parking.
That should be reflected in the minutes, Planner Tally, that there was a dispute on that and that it needs to be addressed.
Well, can you be more specific, Marty?
Well, Jason
To what-
DeSalvo,
yeah.
our former vice chair,
Yeah.
sat in on the negotiations. I don't want to take away from this applicant, but just a quick summary. But Jason DeSalvo sat in on those negotiations, and he has a different take on what the number of cars that should be made available for public parking in the Seymour deck, and this needs to be reviewed further. I can't.
By negotiations, you mean?
at the public hearings and at the time, what was proposed by the applicant and what the understanding of those who were deciding
On the resolution.
on the resolution would be.
That approved it.
So I can't, I don't want to say anything more than that, but just that there is a dispute. It needs to be further vetted. It may be nothing, but
That's to that project. It's not to this.
it's not to this
To this
project.
project or to the Midtown deck.
So
This is-
there's no relationship
this is the-
to,
Well, but Jason's point that there were supposed to be
More
spaces. in
additional
the-
public parking for the public for use for drive-in for retail in the other deck,
In the other decks,
in the
right?
other deck.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah, in addition to what is being proposed here. So since you brought it up, I just didn't want that to slip by, and I don't want to take away from your application
Okay,
here.
thank
Okay?
you. So as I was stating, as was told to me, that construction is scheduled to begin on the Midtown parking deck right after May 12th, and that none of the 315 parking spaces have been allocated as of yet. And also, as per Janice Talley's memo, the parking utility has not yet determined the split between permit and permitted spaces, between permit and metered spaces, excuse me, on the Midtown parking deck. So in other words, nothing has been allocated to our knowledge for the Midtown parking deck.
But did Mr. Karasik indicate that there would be both permit spaces and metered spaces in the deck?
And they will be available at the appropriate time.
And the question is, how many of the 315 spaces would be metered and how many of them would be permitted, and that hasn't been determined yet?
Correct.
Okay.
And that,
But that there would be permitted spaces available in the
Correct.
deck?
correct.
Okay. And have you discussed that with Mr. Tylik, and has he agreed to acquire any permit parking spaces when they become available in that deck?
He has stated that he will agree to purchase permit spaces in the Midtown deck when they are available,
How many?
a minimum of 4.
Okay. All right. Anything further you'd like to add about the parking?
No.
Okay. I think that's all we have, Mr. Chair, for Mr. Sionis.
I have a question, just a quick one. The 4 spaces that Mr. Tylik agrees to purchase, for which tenant?
For the arts complex,
Oh,
daytime spaces.
okay.
What is the relationship between that and the report of a list that's 3,000 people long waiting for permits? I was curious about none of the spaces are allocated versus that list of long list of people waiting for permit parking and whatever.
You mean how the, what, I can't hear, what did you, I can't really hear what you said, Carol?
I'm asking what is the relationship between the town's list of people who are waiting for permits and the deck where there is nothing been allocated? I was
We don't
just,
even have, haven't even started a waiting list for this. I
so
did
that
speak,
waiting list doesn't relate to the town's waiting list that they,
the way that,
publicized.
I had my conversations with the parking superintendent is that this deck is going to be operated very similar to the Crescent deck, where you can pull a ticket, and some people also have like fobs that let them in. Those are tantamount to the permits. They're probably going to be just, it's not going to be like a C permit or an N permit. It's going to have a separate type of permit, and they haven't figured out exactly how they're going to administer that yet and how they're going to allocate. They haven't even opened up a waiting list at this point.
So are there separate waiting lists for each parking facility?
There, no, there's a waiting list for daytime parking permits that are good anywhere in the downtown. There's no waiting list for overnight permits, but there are a limited number of daytime parking permits.
So they are gonna, what you're saying is that they're gonna start a list just for this deck for daytime? Or they don't know?
They don't know. What they did tell me, because I said, is it going to be permit, is it going to be metered? It's going to be handled like the Crescent deck, with fobs and tickets.
Right, well, that's just how you get access and
Right.
how your permit will be
Right.
executed.
And they
but not-
haven't determined how they're going to allocate that.
So the answer to your question is, we don't know.
So that, I mean, related to that is the fact that the surface deck, surface parking now, a lot of it is permit spaces. What happens to those permit holders who currently park their cars in that surface lot?
Well, the presumption is they'll be able to get the fob.
They had to replace those.
Yeah,
Wasn't
they're
it?
gonna
It was part
replace
of the
it.
resolution that they had to
So-
replace those spaces. So I don't see that they would reassign those spaces. But based on the data that was provided to us since the last hearing, there are an excess of spaces, the exact number of which I'm still a little cloudy on, but, you know, there are quite a few. Capacity has been increased.
Sounds like 89 was the thing. the number.
89, it's somewhere between 89 and 100 and some odd, depending on how you add it up, and it could be a little bit less than that, but I think if we look at 89 as a conservative figure, you know, I am interpreting here, but it sounds like the question is, out of those 89, what's going to be allocated as additional permit parking for daytime? Because there is no list for overnight, and daytime is up until
5 p.m.
5 p.m. And on Glenridge, one of my concerns is evening parking in Glenridge with this facility, with the restaurants and such in the area, and activity over at the Wellmont. And so it seems as if that, you know, with the permit spaces, if those will be available to some degree to handle that evening crowd. And it's, I guess, the real question is, how much is it enough, and where does that leave us, you know? But we can discuss that shortly, I imagine, since there aren't any more witnesses. But in the meantime, are there any more questions?
I do. I have another question. I know we touched upon it the last meeting, but I'm still concerned about how you will do construction in that space. It's such a narrow space, and it strikes me that there's 15 parking spots in the surface lot now that directly abut the property. And to do this construction, I can't imagine how you'll do it without having to access where those cars currently park.
I think-
Can you tell me about
Yeah,
how
I
the
think
construction
Mr.
will be phased, or?
I think
Mr.
Mr.
Tylak
Tylak
addressed that last time.
Well, my,
He has construction experience.
well, that's what he said. I have construction experience. We do this all the time. End of story. I'm not satisfied with that.
Well, can you,
Yeah.
where is he?
Can you elaborate on that? How it, you know,
You have to-
well, but maybe you need to,
Well, I mean, what is the plan? I mean,
Well,
if this
let-
gets approved.
But if I might,
Yep.
please get on mic, and remember, you're still under oath.
Is the green light on?
There you go.
Now, my impression of your testimony, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression of your testimony is that construction will take place during the day. They will use public space. The contractors are going to try their best not to block traffic, not to create a problem, but by necessity, there is going to be some obstruction of public parking spaces, at least when they're offloading and trying to get materials onto the site. You know, if it's a situation where once materials get onto the site, whatever transports them there can be moved out of the way. But because of the narrowness of the access, things are going to have to brought in small measurements, small doses. So it's not going to be an ideal situation, but I don't think that there's any other way to do it, given the street. So there is going to be some inconvenience to the surrounding area out of necessity during the time that materials are brought onto the property. Once they're on the property, then it's mainly going to be an issue of noise and dirt and that kind of thing.
Stuff around, but now we've also brought in the fact that the Midtown deck will be under construction at that time as well, I would imagine. So how does that work?
That would kind of be an ideal opportunity to get the materials onto the site while they're
That's
clearing.
exactly correct. So I'm assuming that they're probably going to close the street once in a while for their construction. Our project, comparing to everything else that's going on in town, is really small.
It's small, but it's tight, and it's in a narrow street that's surrounded by little buildings where
Correct.
people live in apartments. Businesses are being conducted across the street. And it strikes me it's a difficult construction project, and you seem to be just brushing it off.
No, I'm absolutely not brushing it off.
I think really what you're looking for is a commitment that you'll coordinate with the construction on the deck. Because, I mean, if you can use the deck as access from the other side of your property to get
Sure.
materials on, that would solve a whole lot of problems, because you could get things, you could have larger containers moved in, but it would require some cooperation, coordination, and I guess a commitment from you in managing the changes in the construction to make sure that, the impact upon the area is as minimal as possible.
So I intend to be there every day, 9 to 5. So I'm going to have a pretty good sense of what's going on. And all the subcontractors, the most important thing is the iron steel construction, which probably going to take about a week. The delivery is going to take probably about 4 hours. So if we need to get a permit and close the street for 4 hours, we'll do that. And, Seymour South Willow was closed for weeks. If we can get a permit for 4 hours to just unload the truck, because that's basically what we need. We need, the biggest problem is going to be a steel.
I'll say it again, you're going to have a crane on site that
We're
will
not gonna
just...
have a crane.
Oh, no crane?
No.
To do the steel work?
There's other ways
Okay.
to do this.
If I can make a suggestion, we have a building and construction department whose purview is to monitor these sorts of activities. It's probably not the best place. He's not going to be able to tell us what would satisfy us, and I would also venture that we're not qualified to be able to comment, so I think I would leave it to the construction officials to properly monitor the street. You'll have to get appropriate permits, you can't
That's
close
right.
the street, and I think it'd be implemented that way.
And they might be able to help you coordinate with the efforts for the Midtown deck and the developers there and their construction.
great.
To make it smoother.
And I think the police department is also
the police.
very much party to the discussions. I mean, my office is, at the corner of Bloomfield Avenue and North Willow Street, and as Mark indicated, South Willow Street is, where the redevelopment project is closed most of the time now. Also, almost every morning when I come in, the building under construction at the corner of Glenridge Avenue and North Willow, there's almost always a police car there while early in the morning when the cranes are there or they're mobilizing for the day, and there's some, they're controlling the traffic and, things work.
Counselor's correct, it's not the construction department. They really don't get involved in managing and coordinating when things are done. They just come to inspect. It's the police that get involved with stopping the streets and when that timing occurs. That's the coordinating entity. So there's a hired police car usually, and
All I can say from my side is that I have experience from New York, where traffic is a nightmare all the time, 24 hours a day. And we had projects on 72nd Street, on 14th Street, and
Yeah, that's not a good look for you to to recommend to us, because I think you have enough of us here who have had to deal with those things and don't have good memories about them, so. But what we're looking for is your commitment to, we know as just, as a matter of reality, that
Yes,
there's going to be
absolutely.
some impact.
Yeah.
But the idea is that we want the impact minimized as much as possible, because of the area and the restrictions and the other businesses. Your neighbors will certainly appreciate it. If that satisfies Carmen, that's what Carmel, that's what we're looking for.
You got my commitment. I have to be responsible for my tenants as well, because, they have businesses. I don't want them to leave. So, yes.
Okay.
Your expectation to build a sidewalk bridge so the sidewalk would stay open at all times? Like it
We'll
is
have, so we have a scaffold over it. Yeah.
protected?
Yep.
So that should be a condition. Good.
That goes without saying. It's dangerous to do anything with it otherwise.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions of Mr. Sionis? Any questions from the public of Mr. Sionis? Steve, did you?
The only thing is the change in the elevations. I think I can see with the light background that you have on the new facade shows me the scale of what it was, and so this really makes sense to me that you've raised the whole thing, but it's not as big as it used to be.
Right.
So, the other questions, the little finials up there, those lights, are those
No,
concrete finials
just-
or concrete?
Yes.
Recap element.
Yes.
I don't have any problems with it.
No, actually, I think Mr. Sionis did a good job with the redesign. I like it. I think it gives the building a lot more character.
The frieze running across the front, does it go around the sides?
Just wraps around the side a little bit, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes, thank you. The metal at the top, let's just confirm, what is the material at the top there? The slats. Looks like-
That's a standing seam metal roof that's on a slope.
Yeah. It's similar to what's at the South Willow building at the corner of Bloomfield?
Similar, yes.
Yeah. See, Paul, these tops are just taking away from the building and looking, cheap. I can't say it any other way. It's just degrading the township where these metal panels are slipped in, or sometimes the fiberglass on some of the other buildings. And, like the Vestry's a beautiful building, the Montclair also very nice, but there's those top elements where in both those cases, I think it's either metal or fiberglass, cement panels. That's what everybody comments on. You've got these beautiful, sort of repro or retro buildings, and this metal business just takes away. Is there anything we can do to make that recede, or not use metal, or use some other alternative materials there? It just, even looking at the building at the corner of Bloomfield, which is the Pinnacle Building. I don't know if it has a name to it. But
Phoenix Building.
Phoenix Building, okay. So, the Pinnacle's there, so. That building is a kind of classical retro, but the top just doesn't, I saw it.
What you're handing him, Paul, I believe is from the PowerPoint exhibit that was marked at the last meeting.
Yeah, and
That shows that metal roof.
Slide 6?
Yeah, and it is hidden pretty much by the pergola. Yeah,
Right.
it's not terrible, but is there anything that can be done to avoid that? Because you do see it coming down and up. You know, you do see it.
Could you put skylights there at all,
What do
any
you-
windows?
Well, it's behind windows. I mean, and I understand there's an architectural style that has these extra stories, kind of very modern, very without a lot of detail, so that they blend in, so that they do recede. That's the idea. Would you prefer something that looked like a stucco or a rough finish, or would you prefer? What are you kind of looking for?
I don't want to be material specific, but what I just want to say is that where it's being used all over the place, it's not working.
Right, but so I'm not trying to be material specific. I'm looking for texture. What kind of look are you
I don't think the
zeroing in on?
I don't think the texture is as important as the fact that it just doesn't draw attention to itself and say, you know, hey, we're adding this kind of modernist overlay that's just not working. It seems the applicant wanted to say something there. I mean, maybe a stucco is the way to go.
Would it be better if it's a brick color to go along with the sides?
So we intend to use either copper or zinc, which is high-end metals, rather than aluminum that's throughout the town.
So you're going to use real metal there?
Yes.
Okay. If you're using a copper zinc, then that'll be fine. It'll gray out, and that'll look okay.
And we could
All right.
put it on the tower.
Most of the time, it's the cheap aluminum, and it screams ugly, right? Okay.
So there's a difference in color, though, between copper and zinc, right? So are you using
The zinc
copper
is the
or
gray,
zinc?
as
It's going to be
shown.
the gray zinc.
The
It
gray
goes,
zinc.
it goes to,
Temporary.
it's a combined element, it
Oh,
goes to a
gotcha.
grayish, a little green gray, you know.
Yeah.
It kind of, it blends itself out.
So are there any more questions from the board about any elements of this application? Because I think, Mr. Chairman, that everything's in, right?
That would conclude our case, Mr. Chairman.
So if there are no more questions, is there anyone from the public who wants to comment about the, and there we have it. Please come forward. Let's see.
Good evening, planning board. Mr. Nguyen. I can't figure out whether your sense of humor is because you've been up there so many years, or it's just aging by itself, but after the service. I'm Ed Remsen. I am the president of Studio Montclair, Inc., a 23-year-old locally based visual arts organization that, just so we're always clear, it's a volunteer position. I receive no compensation. I also served on this planning board 28 years ago, which freaks me out a little bit when I think about how many years ago that was. A couple of thoughts about the project. Studio Montclair, just a little profiling to understand the context, we represent visual artists. That means we represent artists, painters, sculptors, people who make glass, people who make stuff I can't even begin to describe, high-end jewelry and crafts, all kinds of stuff. And our membership has grown tremendously in large measure because of the dynamic that I think drives this project in part. We have almost 600 artist members in the organization, many of whom live locally, most of whom live in a 2 or 3 county area, and some live literally all over. The ability of people to send their art to compete in shows is limited by their ability to put it on a computer and hit a couple of buttons. So we do have members all over the world. We have no standing and no interest in this project, wanted to say that. We are not the tenant. We do not anticipate ever being a tenant. We will not manage the facility. The only thing that might happen is that as the shows that are in there are advertised as what they call a call for artists, and we would hope that some of our artist members would choose to participate in a jury selection and perhaps be in the show. But Studio Montclair has no interest in this project except wanting to see more art. It strains the argument a little bit, but I would comment that at a time when most of our members, many of our members, especially any of the younger artists, like Younger or Anything, can't afford to live in this town, they can, if they're an artist, be able to show their work and make their livelihood in town. The model that Mr. Tyler has come up with, which basically provides a subsidy for the arts section, allows for another small gallery in town to exist, where artists of all kinds of backgrounds, mostly painters I understand, to be in shows. Just for describing where we have 3 locations in town. We've grown a lot the last couple of years. We have the gallery at 127 Bloomfield Avenue in the Montclarian, and we manage the public art windows for the owner of the building as part of our lease agreement. So we essentially program the whole front. We occupy what used to be our gallery at Academy Square, for those of you who've been around a long time, the former Catherine Gibbs Business School building. That is now our incubator, which gives emerging artists who've never had a show an opportunity to have a professional show. And we occupy a small space in what used to be the Warner Communications building on Lorraine Avenue, which is a small gallery, but mostly a small retail operation for us. So we have a footprint in town. There's no question. I haven't seen or heard a lot of opposition to the concept that drives the upstairs. So I want to be clear. I don't think I have to make an impassioned argument that art is good and that this project has value along those lines. I will say that one of the things that we know, and one of the reasons that, frankly, we created the Arts Council many years ago, was that we knew that there's a strong economic tie between art and business. And when I watch the growth that we've experienced with the number of people who come to town to see the shows, to pay for the parking, to have dinner, the artists are purchasing locally, they're buying their framing locally, there's no question there's a direct link between art and economics. And those of you who've been in town a long time, and there's a few over here who probably outpaced me in terms of years in town, there used to be a time when you could shoot a cannon off on Glenridge Avenue or Bloomfield Avenue and not worry a whit about hitting anybody or anything of consequence. And the good news is, and I was thinking about this in terms of the decision you have to make, so much has happened in the last 2 decades, let's call it, in the town center, that the applications you get are the result of the kind of activity that we've generated, and some people want to put a cap on and say too much, it's too many things. But there was a time when we couldn't get anybody downtown at all. And so you are dealing, thanks to a lot of people who work very hard to bring business back to the town center and the other shopping districts in town, difficult choices about density and use and parking that I'm sure are difficult, that you never had to deal with that many years ago. I will not comment on the density issue. It is far beyond my expertise, and you all have a lot of talent up there and expertise and are guided by the staff. What I would comment on is, I think while I appreciate Mr. Schwartz's comment about the parking, there's a lot of variables around the parking to be created, and there's a lot of unknowns because there's a lot of negotiating taking place. I think the timing of this is that the parking that is going to be on that same block is imminent, obviously. And whatever the final numbers are going to be, the number of spots that the applicant chooses to acquire via permit is not a huge number, but in large measure, I think, takes care of his daytime parking. If that was not the case, and knowing how much activity there is on Lower Glenridge Avenue, I think there's a legitimate issue between the daytime and the nighttime with the restaurants. I think that issue sort of disappears, that no matter how many spots are going to be left for permitting, there's going to be enough spots for somebody on that block to rent a spot. So that's my comment. I think the project has value. It'll create more activity. Arts will be glad to welcome the artist and the business that flows from there, and I encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? Mr. Tremulak, do you need to
I'd
sum
like
up?
to just spend a few minutes and talk about the parking variance in particular, because I know that's the board's biggest concern, as it usually is with the projects in the downtown. We have a parking requirement for this project of 27 spaces based upon the zoning ordinance. We're providing 10 spaces, which results in a 17-space deficiency. It's a mixed-use building currently, and it's going to be an even larger and a different mix of uses if this project is approved. And I'd like to just address the 3 or 4 different uses we're proposing in the parking with respect to each of those. First off, the retail. There's currently 2 rather small retail units on the first floor. We're not looking to change those units in any way. They will remain the same size. They will not be enlarged. Those units have functioned for a very long time with 2 parking spaces in the rear that have been used by the owners or employees of the businesses. The requirement for that space under the zoning ordinance is 9 1/4 parking spaces, but again, currently and for many years, those spaces have functioned with only 2 spaces, and we propose to continue that and provide the 2 spaces in the rear for the merchants. These are small spaces. This is not a destination. Nobody's coming down to Glen Ridge Avenue to go to these stores, and they're there for other reasons, so typically park either in the current lot or other lots or whatever. But again, we're not increasing in any way the demand for the retail, and we're maintaining the same number of spaces for the retail. Okay, the arts and entertainment space that's proposed. Under the zoning ordinance, 4 parking spaces are required. We're proposing to satisfy that requirement by purchasing and maintaining parking permits in the deck to be constructed next door to this project. I don't think there's any real doubt that those permits will be available. My reading of Janice's memo, by the way, indicates, I think, that there are 85 existing parking spaces on the surface lot, which will be replaced with 315 spaces, so that the net gain in parking spaces on that property would be 230 spaces, if my math is correct. And again, we don't know exactly what the deal is going to be, but we're going to be first in line, I guess, in reserving permit spaces, and we commit and would agree to make that a condition of the approval. So those 4 spaces, again, would meet the parking requirement for the arts and entertainment space that we're proposing. With respect to the residential units, we're proposing 6 parking spaces. The zoning ordinance requires 2 units per apartment, or a total of 12 spaces. We're providing 10 spaces, which will, I think, adequately serve the needs of the residential tenants. Mr. Steiger, our traffic and parking expert, testified that according to the U.S. Census statistics, 1.1 parking spaces is really what's the demand is, what the requirement is in this area per apartment. So if you accept that 1.1 per unit, that's a total of 7 parking spaces. Again, we're going to have 10 spaces available for the residential. Also, coincidentally, it was interesting to me as I was reading through Janice's memo regarding the deck to be constructed, and the 3rd page refers to the Seymour Street redevelopment plan, which approved 1.1 parking spaces for each of the 200 apartments to be constructed as part of that redevelopment plan. Exactly the same number that Mr. Steiger proposed. So, I think that, again, is consistent with Mr. Steiger's testimony, and it seems fairly clear that this board was satisfied in approving a 1.1 parking space per apartment for the 200 apartments being constructed a block away, and it would seem to me that a similar conclusion should be made with respect to this project. And again, we believe 7 is the realistic demand. We're providing 10. And then, we also, obviously, I think, part of the consideration that entered into the parking requirement for the redevelopment plan is the accessibility and the proximity to mass transit, trains, buses, et cetera. Same applies to this location. So, again, the 10 spaces we're proposing is probably more than is required if you accept Mr. Steiger's testimony and if you accept the conclusions that entered into your judgment with respect to the redevelopment plan. So, we're providing enough parking for the residential. We're providing the required parking for the new arts and entertainment space, and we're providing the same amount of parking that's been provided for many years for the existing retail spaces. There's a small amount of office space, roughly 400 square feet. That's part of this project, which is a parking requirement of 1.6 spaces under the zoning ordinance. I mean, that's not going to be your typical office space. It's really going to be used in conjunction with the arts and entertainment space. But even if you apply the 1.6 parking spaces to that, we have enough, given the 10 spaces we're providing, to meet a realistic requirement of 7 for the residential. So, putting all that together, I believe we're providing adequate parking to meet the demands of this project. And I think the parking variance as well as the other variances can be granted under either C1 criteria, given the fact that this is a unusual size lot. It's very narrow and very deep. It's inadequate in size according to the current zoning ordinance, but obviously permissible as an existing non-conforming use. You also have the added constraint of the existing building on the site, which requires that the only remaining space is the 9-foot driveway, which has served the property, again, for many years. And then under C2 criteria, I think everyone recognizes the benefits to be derived from this project, particularly the arts and entertainment space, which is obviously a very beneficial use to the local artist community, but also to the entire Montclair community at large, and that the benefits resulting from that would outweigh any detriments, if there are any, resulting from the granting of the variances. With respect to the other variances, I'm just going to lump them together with, the insufficient driveway width, the tandem parking spaces, the aisle width variances. It's important to remember that the driveway and the parking spaces are going to be utilized solely by tenants. They're not going to be utilized by customers coming to visit either the retail space or the arts and entertainment space. But it's going to be people who are familiar with this. They're going to know how to maneuver, how to get in and out. Undoubtedly, there'll be occasions, I guess, when somebody's coming in. I apologize, I thought I'd shut this off. There might be an occasional issue with cars pulling in while somebody's pulling out, but again, there'll be people who are familiar with the conditions there and will know that they may have to back up to accommodate another car. And also, combined with that, is this is all going to be controlled and supervised by Mr. Tylik, who will be on site, who will be able to allocate the parking spaces dependent upon the individual needs of the people living in the apartments, and we'll be able to control this. So I think the parking works, given those conditions, and I think the parking is adequate based upon what I said previously. So taking all that into account, I think this is a good project which should be approved. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councilor, could you just recap the numbers there, because there were a lot of them. If you take away the I think you said there were 2 now for the retail, but the requirement right now is 7 or 9?
9.
Okay. So
9 plus, so we're deficient 9 for the retail and always have been.
You have been. So you take away the 7 plus from what you're proposing right now, and what is now the parking deficiency and variance being requested?
You mean if you take away the 7, then it would...
Take away the 7 that you're already not providing at this time. What is the deficiency?
That would reduce the deficiency, I guess, to 18 spaces? 16 spaces, I'm sorry. No, 18.
I thought it was,
18.
yeah, I thought it was 17.
I'm sorry, the deficiency was 17.
Right, that's what I
So
thought.
we reduced the deficiency to
10.
10.
Okay, and then now if you take away the higher demand number, which is required by code, to the 1.1, which you're asserting should be the realistic number, we've heard that argument before, then what is the deficiency?
Well, you've got a current requirement of 12, and we would say 7 is required, so that reduces that by 5. So now you're down to 4 spaces.
5. We know, you're an attorney, not an accountant.
Clearly.
I couldn't even follow it as we were going, that's why I'm
trying to use
I'm making
pen.
better you look foolish than me trying to figure it out.
I have the same problem with numbers, but I'm with you on this one. I can follow.
I had all this figured out before I got here, I thought. And then you're down to 5, and we're agreeing to purchase 4 permits in the lot. So now we're virtually break even, maybe 1 space deficient because of I know. I know. It's virtually even, not exactly. Well, we're, that's going to be our risk, candidly. If the board accepts that and imposes that a condition, we're going to have to get them, or we're going to have to come up with another acceptable solution for off-site parking, which may have to be approved by this board. But I'm fairly confident out of the 230 spaces that I think are going to be available in that deck, I don't know how many of them will be allocated for permits, but that we're gonna hopefully be first in line or close to first in line and be able to get them. And we're confident that we will. Unfortunately, we don't know the specifics yet, but that will, I assume, be determined by the town at some point in time. And the other thing to keep in mind too, I know the board has a concern about the parking requirements generated by the restaurants, particularly the Crosby. But, that's a younger crowd, as I think we all know if we've been in there, as I have. And consequently, that means it's a later crowd. I don't think that on weekends that place is, filling up until after 9 o'clock and probably even later. But before that, and they're going to be using the presumably meter spaces in the lot. So, I don't, the people who are coming to art shows in this building will not be conflicting with the late night crowd going to the Crosby. Have you been to the Crosby? But that's my observation. For the board may or may not accept that, but you've got 85 spaces in the Midtown parking lot now. You're going to have 315. That's a lot. So. Did I finish answering your questions, Mr. Schwartz, even though my math was
Okay.
somewhat...
Like I said, better you than me.
So, first of all, I think that most, if not all, of my fellow board members, fully support the idea of providing a place for the arts to flourish. It's been something historically that's been on the agenda for Glenridge Avenue for years in different forms and different iterations. I personally hope that this is very successful and that it is used as much as it possibly can. And because I hope that, that's kind of what caused my concern about parking. All of my concern basically about this development has been mainly about parking. And not only because of what's currently going on there, but as I mentioned earlier in the hearing, I think we have to always think down the road. I hear your great argument about, for years, the retail spots have existed with, only using 2 spaces. Well, hopefully things improve and, maybe current tenants move out, some other tenants come in there that attract a higher turnover. I hope for the success of all developments, but we want to make sure that, there is, reasonable longevity, where that we're not stuck with something down the road that is creating more of a problem for us because we didn't think about a decision that we made, earlier. We've seen that happen before, and while we don't have crystal balls, at least I don't, my batteries died in my crystal ball years ago. So, I can't tell what the future's going to bring, but we have to kind of think about it and anticipate it. And, I think that listening to all the various numbers about the parking and the possible iterations, trying to give you some exact numbers started to give me a headache, so I kind of backed off from that. My general sense is that right now, I think that the deck will help accommodate any increase from of business at this site. But I am not only hearing this application about that deck. I'm hearing the Seymour Street application. I'm hearing the applications of the restaurants who expanded on the other side of Glenridge Avenue. Every application that we have heard, going back to whenever, has been deficient in parking. And so I'm trying to add all those deficiencies in and really kind of trying to keep a sense of what's going on with this deck. My sense from the numbers now is that I think the increase in the capacity is good, that we should hopefully anticipate that the deck will get us to a point where we're comfortable on that street. But I'm going to say it here now on the record, I think any other application that we hear that talks about adding to the usage of this deck for a parking deficiency needs to be looked at really carefully. And I think that goes for most of the decks in town. Because it's not just, it's the one application that goes into the reconstruction of the deck or the reason why the deck gets expanded. It's the ones that come after it, and it's the ones that are already there. There's the businesses, there's the buildings that already have problems with people parking, and so they don't park. Yeah, they've been operating, they fine, just like all of us. Yeah, we park far away sometimes because we need to, or we do other things, or we don't go places. I don't go to restaurants on Glenridge Avenue because I don't want to hassle with parking. I go someplace that has a parking lot, where I don't have to think about it, or so, there's all sorts of ways that we make do. But all of that is, all of this is to say that I think that this is a good application. I think that I've seen enough that my concerns about the parking have been pretty much addressed. and that I would recommend that we approve the application. But I would like to make sure that we have, that if any other changes occur at this property, that we make sure it's something that has to come back to the board for review. Because, as the current owner is going to do a wonderful job there, but he's not immortal, and, we all, none of us are immortal. We don't know what's going to happen next week. We don't know what's going to happen 2 or 3 years from now. So, and that could just change everything. That could change everything. And we want to make sure that the changes and expansions that we are permitting, that I'm recommending that we permit, don't backfire, because of changes that occur 2 or 3 years from now that we couldn't anticipate or didn't anticipate. So, that's my 2 cents. So
I have a comment on the parking. I think I had mentioned this at the last meeting. I don't think we should deem this to be arts and entertainment space, but that's how you'll use it. I think it'd be wise just to have the parking requirement be just a general professional office use, and then you're freed from any sort of issue. It would add to the count that you need in your variance, but I think it's, for a project this size, which is relatively small, I think that the ability to know what's going on in the arts, and no disrespect, but the ability for anyone to know what actually is taking place in that so-called arts and entertainment space, which is half projected to be an office space anyway, I think it would be better just to call it general commercial, increase the parking requirement by 2 more, and issue the variance on that basis. And then if it floats into a general commercial purpose later, we've done our job here.
Well, this is, because I know at the last meeting, the board had asked that space be deed restricted for arts and entertainment uses, so.
Exactly.
And that's an important distinction to be clarified in the resolution, so we know what to enforce.
Yeah. With all respect, Tony, I think the important point here is that we want arts and entertainment there, and that could be a public good basis to warrant giving the variance. And so I was going to suggest that be made a condition, but since it was proposed as a deed restricted, that makes it even better. Would you agree to a condition not to run an art show, a public art show on a night when the Wellmont, to coordinate with the Wellmont? Is that possible?
I'm not sure how we could do that. I don't know.
Well, an opening, I'm sorry, how about this? An opening for an art show on a night. I'm just suggesting it may not be feasible, just an idea. I mean, they don't have Wellmont shows every night. And as you know, an art show gets a rush between, 6 and 9, can have a lot of people coming in, quick cars in, they leave.
Normally opening and exhibitions, so.
Well, Wellmont hasn't had anything there, restrictions to do that, so it's a one-way business.
Wellmont's already there.
That's what I'm saying.
It's a building.
That's what I'm saying, when you say that they must coordinate with the Wellmont.
Well, and I think, too, we're dealing with if I'm recalling the testimony, we're dealing with a small space that has, that can only accommodate a limited number of people by code, given the dimensions of the space. So, I mean, I don't think that even if the Wellmont was having a show that evening, that the type of activities, we've heard different, there's only going to be exhibitions, there's only going to be, rehearsals or whatever. But like I said, I'm hoping that it's very successful. I would love it if they, if you could use the space and give aspiring artists space to have shows and but I think what you're asking for is going to be, in reality, as a practical matter, hard to coordinate, and I would think that in operating the site, that you'd kind of want to know if the Wellmont was going to have something big going on that was going to attract a lot of people. That wouldn't be a good night for anybody to have anything else going on to draw a crowd in that particular area until either after the Wellmont show or early before. So I don't know how,
Sounds to me a little bit like micromanaging business. I think it would be nice not to have conflicts, but I don't know how we can manage it.
and again, and then on the evening, you figure that in the evening, that's when the deck is going to have its maximum capacity, because the day spots are going to be out, and, you know, you're going to have at least 200 spots open up, I would think, you know, with 315 capacity, that 200 would be kind of a reasonable number to say that, okay, that's going to be there to park people in the evening, you know, best case scenario.
I mean, there's the Colestri Gallery now on Church Street, which is, I think, a new addition. And, you know, people are obviously using the surrounding parking there, and they're using the Church Street deck. But that really is not impacted by the Wellmont to a great extent. I'm sure some people park there and then go to the Wellmont, but, you know, if they're using a restaurant later. But here, you know, the Wellmont is definitely conflicting with this, and so, you know, how many people do you think max would be coming to an art opening?
It's hard to know, but the problem with conflicts with the Wellmont and potential art openings in this building is that, you know, art opening would likely be on a Saturday. I think the Wellmont is normally doing shows on Saturdays, so you know, there could be a lot of conflicts.
What was, I believe there was a testimony given about the maximum number of people at any one time in the arts area.
I think the expectation was 25, but I
Yeah.
think by
That's what I was
code it was
thinking.
about 114, Mr. Sionis? Thank you.
Yeah, that was the testimony, right.
Well,
But again,
most openings to art shows are, you know, Friday or Thursday nights. They're usually not, they're Saturday afternoon or sometimes Sunday. You know, they usually don't open an art exhibit Saturday night. It's just,
well, I think my client would disagree with that, but, I mean, what are you proposing, though, that we couldn't?
This is my
I'm
concern.
I'm putting it out. Carol may be entirely correct. It may be too much micromanagement, but, you know, the crunch time is going to be 6 to 9 o'clock if there's a, you know, if you're having an art exhibit, and the restaurants are doing something, you know, you could see it all crunching up there. So what to do? That's, you know, that's why I put it out there. Mandating you can't do a show at the same time as the Wellmont may not be feasible, you know, and maybe you have to rely on just market coordination, you know.
Yeah, I
And smart
think
business management as
Yeah.
well. I mean, I think we can leave that to the whose business it is to know what they want.
Yeah, because this isn't the only business in that area that is drawing people, and certainly in comparison to the restaurants, I don't think this is going to be a major impact.
If I can say something. So when we have an exhibit, it usually runs more than 1 week. It's 3 or 4 weeks. So the opening is only 1 weekend, and then the rest is spread through 4 weeks.
I was referring to the opening night. That's when you get a, you know, crunch of people.
But I'm saying we won't have opening nights every weekend.
Understood.
We're going to have them once every 3 or 4 weeks.
Can I just make a comment, Mr. Nguyen, about the concern about change in use, particularly with respect to the arts and entertainment space? I understand that concern very well because of the potential impact on parking. But I think you raised a very good point at the last meeting, which is that given where that space is located on the upper floors, sandwiched between residential apartments with no like separate entrance for the office, that the most likely conversion would be to another apartment or two. And that being the case, if there were to be 2 apartments to replace the arts and entertainment space, that would be a requirement of 4 cars, which is exactly what the requirement is for the arts and entertainment space.
Right.
So what I would suggest is that condition provide that there be no other commercial use, that the arts and entertainment space could not be converted to another commercial use without
Coming back to the board.
to the board for what would likely be a parking variance or any other variance that might be triggered.
Aren't you at maximum density?
Well, I was going to say that too.
So you'd have to go back
There
for,
could be a density issue.
there's a
There
density
is.
issue.
That, you know.
I think that almost
would be-
negates the whole
but that-
thing.
So that would require.
Or that just guarantees that it comes back to a board for review
Come
one
back
way
to
or
the
the other.
zoning
Well, that's
board.
correct. That's why, I mean, it negates that condition. Like, why?
Well, no, if it just says that if they want to do something with it, if they want to do a commercial use, they have to come back. If they want to change the density, they have to come back.
Well, they have to go to
They have to
Board
go
of
to
But they'd
Adjustment.
have to go to the
If
Board of
there's a
Adjustment.
density,
so-
the way I would envision wording it would be that it could be converted to residential use, provided it complies with density requirements and there are no other variances triggered. I mean, it might not comply today, density
Right.
might be revised sometime in the future, I
Right.
don't know.
And then that wouldn't require a deed restriction? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know what the deed restriction is necessary. All that does is put the public on notice. It's going to be a requirement of this board's resolution and enforceable, whether it's in a deed restriction or not. But if the board is going to require a deed restriction.
What is going to be, what did you just say? I missed that.
The requirement,
If we put in a requirement, like he had just discussed about it only not being able to be converted to a commercial use, right? And that's something, too, that the resolution, we could cause the resolution to be filed, recorded, rather.
That's a condition, not a deed
So
restriction.
so that does because putting the public on notice does serve a purpose. Makes it harder to slip things by, and not that we're saying that anybody was going to do that, but certainly it makes it a record so that, down the line, anybody searching the title is going to see that. And while it's not a restriction, they're going to see that that was a
not
condition
a
of the
restriction,
approval.
but it puts
Right.
the resolution
Right.
on
And I
public
think that's
record.
probably an easier,
If someone purchases the building down the road.
Right.
They can't say they weren't aware of this
exactly,
because it's buried in a planning board file.
right.
I understand that.
What is the requirement for 1 in 500 gross square feet of arts and entertainment space come from?
The zoning ordinance, or the parking ordinance that's contained in the zoning ordinance.
I'm looking at the page on 347-101, offsite parking requirement. I don't see arts and entertainment space listed.
I think if there's art galleries, it would be the same as art galleries. I don't have it with me because I couldn't bring my card.
Assisted living, automobile, and auto sales, those are the days. No gallery. So you can look at it. 347-101. Are you extrapolating from RSIS? No, that's.
No, it's in our zoning ordinance. It's not Seymour Street, because this is not in the redevelopment area.
I'm trying really hard to see there. I apologize, but I'm missing.
You're in 347-101?
Yeah. I see general business, 1-250.
I know I saw this.
Oh, there's a category called uses not listed above. So according to that category, which most nearly approximates that use. That's a catch-all, I've never heard it.
Let's see.
Could that be in the C3 ordinance by any chance? I know I checked that, and I know I thought I confirmed that.
Unfortunately, I don't have, I didn't bring all the whole code down, because elevator was broken. So, I have to look.
Oh, you think it's right in C3?
Well, that's,
Well, it's somewhere, 'cause I know I saw it. And I have an older book, so it could be in,
yeah, but I generally don't, I don't think we put the parking requirements in the zone, in that section of the zone.
right. I think the,
The only one for 500.
No, but it's, there's no,
Park Areas, Art Studios.
where is he?
100.1. In 101, the only 500 square foot is for Tractor.
Right, I know. I don't know where that came from. Well, that's something we'll have to.
They were 407, 101.
Yeah.
And then ours is table 4.
All right, 1 per 500 square feet.
I know it's not applicable here, but it is the same requirement as in the Seymour Street redevelopment plan. 2 spaces per 1,000, which is 1 per 500.
No, I was relying on what was on the plans.
This one, 347.101 RSIS table 4.4. It sounds like a mix of code plus RSI. So, doesn't sound directly correct, but.
Was, if that's a question, maybe we should, I know, Paul put him on, Paul, you put it on your plans. What was the source?
The source of the plan says 347-101-RSIS table 4.4,
Right.
which confuses me a
Well,
little
that
bit.
doesn't have,
Well, it's
yeah.
a
That would be residential.
It's the mix of the entirety of that section.
Yeah.
Reference.
So
Sure,
I
so
think if,
you think one of those would actually have it.
If-
So
if-
both of those are covering everything.
What probably happened was when we met, we pointed to the Seymour Street redevelopment plan, which had a requirement of 1 per 500, and that's what was used when developing the site plan. I just didn't look into it, and I didn't realize that it wasn't in the code when I was doing my review for this, of these plans. So I think for this application, the testimony that you're providing is that you're using parking requirements. There is no parking requirement, so you're using what was in the
What
Seymour
was
Street redevelopment plan as
acceptable
part
for
of
the
your
redevelopment.
application.
No parking requirements for,
Art galleries in our ordinance, no.
Well, I think it should be considered as general commercial.
if but I.
It's okay
but
if you give us the variance.
In this case, if there aren't requirements, then Tony's right.
Yeah.
That's where it should default to.
It should stay with
Finally! Let's go have a drink.
Right conceptually off.
Yeah, but,
In which case, it would increase it by
Two. You said 2, right? 2 more spaces, right?
2 more spaces.
Okay. 2 more permits?
Well, I think you just justify the variance on
Right.
on a slightly greater efficiency. That's what I would be in favor of.
Right.
And the board can still certainly require that it be arts and entertainment uses as was testified to.
It's conditioned on that, and that if it changes to a non-commercial use,
Right.
it's going to have to come back. And that would be, do we have to say that now, or is that automatic? Because it would be,
Might as well say it to be clear.
I don't mind saying it to be clear, but,
Yeah.
I think it's a better way to go,
okay.
especially if you're going to record, if the resolution is going to be recorded.
Is your mic on? It isn't. So, but if they increase the density,
No, the density is a zoning board application.
that's what I was curious about.
Yeah.
Are we at the maximum density with the number of units?
Yeah, I'm
That's
pretty
what the testimony was.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's where I'm confused. If you put a residential unit or 2 units in the space, that will increase the density, and therefore the application will need to go before the
Then
zoning
it would
board,
go.
not here.
Which is why
That's right.
I'm suggesting
Why
that it be
the
worded
question.
that way, that it could be converted to residential, provided it doesn't exceed density requirements. Now, we realize that currently it does, but there could be a change down the road. We're talking about something that's going to be in place for many, many years.
Right, and if we
Density
designate a commercial
requirements
now,
could change, but if they don't, then clearly we'd have to go to the zoning board.
and if we're designating that it's a commercial space now, then we don't have to record the resolution. Because by
By the
by
current-
statute, by code,
By the
by
current
code, they would
ordinance.
have to go, if they want to change it to residential, they'd have to go to the zoning board.
Right.
And we're saying that it's commercial now, so we're approving it as commercial space.
Right.
And I'm not, the 2 additional spaces doesn't change my reasoning.
So the space can be converted to residential use within the maximum permitted density without returning to the board.
Yeah.
But if it was going to convert to another commercial use, it would have to come back to the board.
Well, we're already saying that it's a commercial use. So is there, if it changes to a commercial use with a higher density, then they would automatically have to come back too. We're saying this is general commercial, right?
Are we saying if it changes from arts and entertainment
Yeah.
to a different commercial use, then it would have to come back before the
But the
board?
parking requirement would still be the same. I'm saying, because there isn't any...
That's what Tony's point is.
Right, because the only reason why we want it to come back to the board is because of parking.
Well, I also, I mean, to me, I think one of the large benefits of this development is the arts and entertainment space.
Right.
And I think if it were to convert to general office,
I think you
It
also
might
have to bear in mind
weigh
that the
things a little
testimony
different for
given
me.
was that the parking required for the arts and entertainment use is really less than what's needed for the office use, and that was part of the basis for the variance. So if it is not arts and entertainment, then I think you do have a reason for them to come back, because it's a
Okay,
different
let's put it in.
use.
Yeah, we don't have a problem.
Let's put it in.
As long as it's worded that way to allow.
You have that wording? How did you?
Can you read that? I'll work with you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because I want to make sure that we get this, and I'll work with Alan on it as
Yeah.
well.
So, I propose putting a motion for it, that we approve the application with conditions. We've just been discussing a condition with respect to, we're going to acknowledge that it's a commercial space and grant the parking variance on that, but we are going to put in the resolution that it's restricted for arts and entertainment use. So that they go to change that, then they do have to come back. As the Vice Chair says, perhaps that gives a different slant on the granting of the variance, if they're going to put that space to another use in the future. We also have other requirements. Well, isn't that recorded? The metal covering, and Mr. Sionis, if you can confirm the materials that are going to be used on the facade, zinc and copper, is that on the plans? Because if it's not on the plans, then they have to be revised in order to reflect that. So we'll list that as a condition.
I'm a little confused, though. Mr. Sionis, is it copper or zinc, or is it a...
Right,
Or zinc.
copper or zinc, we'd be satisfied with either,
Or combined
or a combination.
with metal like that.
Can I add another suggestion? I'm a little concerned about this. We're allowing them to increase the number of units without coming back to the board. If the number of units increases, then the affordable housing obligation is based on the difference between the number of units today and the number of the units at some future date.
Okay.
Because if you add 2 more units, then there's a requirement for 1 affordable.
Well, but if they add a unit, if they convert a unit, they have to go,
This is aside from,
residential unit.
this is separate from the density issue. I'm just saying, for the obligation to meet our affordable housing requirements. Because it depends.
right, but if they add another unit, they have to meet that anyway, right?
No, not necessarily. It's based on the net increase.
Based on the net
And we're doing it
increase. They should be
incrementally. So that's why I think the net increase should be based on the number of units. The affordable housing requirement should be based on the net increase from the number of units on site now, not the number of units in 5 years.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay?
But
You
in the
understand what I'm
meanwhile,
saying?
meanwhile, the
So
applicant...
It may never-
it might trigger a...
An affordable unit.
affordable,
It
that-
could.
If it's converted in the future.
Right.
To add
We're-
another...
It's just the
could.
net calculation is based on the number of units today.
So does that mean the applicant gets their development fee back? Right, because that's another condition here, is that the applicant needs to pay the development fee.
And that point, maybe at that point, we could probably net out the development fee, because I think the value of creating a unit is far greater than, the development fee that would be paid for the additional units. Okay?
And there also needs to be, an easement with the township for the emergency
rear
access?
entrance, egress door.
Egress,
Right.
yep.
Right, that would be a condition. Yeah.
Okay.
I also think, and I know Mr. Neese or someone would get to this eventually, but I reviewed Mr. Vujich's report, and I think we need to include as conditions that we would comply to his comments 6, 11, 12, and 13 in his June 6, 2019 report. I think those would be,
So 6 was confirmed with testimony during one of the
I thought there
initial
was a
hearings,
comment in
that
there
they would
also.
comply and revise on the plan. 11 is a request for a brief stormwater management statement to confirm that existing and proposed will match. And you said 13, right?
11, 12, and 13.
12 and 13. 12 is related to 11, that no adverse impacts happened that were unforeseen. And then 13, certification of SESC by the Soil Conservation District if applicable.
Okay, well,
Are there any other,
That would cover.
are there any other parts of your report that?
There was testimony regarding management of the parking spaces on the need of the tenants. That related to comments I had in item 3. I don't know if that necessarily needs to be a condition.
Probably not, since testimony has reached it, but are there any other?
No, everything else checks out.
So it's 6, 11, 12, and 13 are the?
6, 11, 12, and 13.
Okay.
And I think that was it, besides our standard.
Will be subject to. So we're not going to require recordation of either a deed restriction or of the resolution? I'm not,
I thought we were.
We're going to have the resolution recorded, because we have the conditions in about the usage,
agreed.
but we're not going to require it to be a deed restriction.
Okay. The tenants shall not use the art space for their events. The board satisfied with the change to the parapet. That was one of the conditions. The building will be completely sprinklered. I wasn't clear on the resolution of the variance for the rear yard setback. We're going to grant that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not clear whether or not private trash hauling is going to be required for this building.
Yes.
Okay. It was self-evident that scaffolding will be required on the front as construction proceeds, and we just discussed the copper or zinc or a combination of those. The applicant has agreed to purchase and maintain permits for 4 spaces.
4 spaces.
And then we discussed if there was a change in use and what have you. I think
the parking, we should say it's for the arts use.
for the arts,
Or for the arts,
the 4 spaces, permit spaces are for the arts use.
yeah.
Then we discussed the easement, and Mr. Vujich's, the items in his report, and that's pretty much what I have.
So that's the motion.
Okay. just for the record, Mr. Schwartz, did you do your certification?
I did not, and I'm going to abstain.
Okay. All right. So we do a roll call? All right. Mr. Vice Chair Brodock?
Yes.
Mr. Schwartz abstains. Ms. Willis?
Yes.
Mr. Rooney?
Yes.
Mr. Ian Wally?
Yes.
Ms. Lockman?
Yes.
Mr. Barr?
Yes.
And Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
I mean, Chair Nguyen.
It's my motion.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. I had no idea that you guys all volunteers. I didn't know that. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Good luck.
Okay. The one item that I added to the agenda for tonight under, I guess it would fall under subcommittee reports or committee reports, is really, we need to retain Tom Watkinson so that to enter into a contract with him for this year so he can finish inspections on 4 projects that have not wrapped up. So Carmel, I got your comments. I agree with you. This is kind of standard language that we put in for our professional service resolution. And we can take out everything after the statutory citation. I don't think that that's a problem. Okay.
I think it doesn't make sense as it reads, so
It's just
it makes sense
confusing.
taking it out, yeah.
Yeah. So is there a motion or any discussion?
I move that we accept, approve.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Any other committee reports, though? Anything else going on?
I don't have any other committee reports. There's, things are not moving very quickly with the other matters that are, we've been trying to talk about with members of council. We have questions about one of the redevelopment plans, the Elm Street, New Street area. Those discussions have not progressed very far. But we'll see. That's kind of where I'm trying to get my first response on. That's about it for now.
There's nothing for the redevelopment committee to be doing.
There is nothing.
At this point,
No.
okay.
Okay? Then we have bills.
My only question is, it looks like some of Mr. Vuich's bills are kind of outstanding from November. We just wonder if we could check on those.
Which ones is that? You mean
There's several. Just looking at the bottom of the invoice.
Yeah, well, the issues, yes, one of these, HP 37 Orange Road, we couldn't pay because they had to pay us a check.
Gotcha.
We finally got the check.
It's usually the only reason
Yeah.
the board hasn't made a payment is waiting on a supplemental income.
They eventually pay. I haven't had anybody who hasn't paid. And also, just so you know, our finance department closes down December and doesn't open up again until January. And there's a delay when we turn over the year.
Certainly could be, yep.
Wish I could do that.
In getting these. So, yeah. I mean, it's taken us a long time.
not pay anything in
to go through and
December?
pay
Yeah.
those
Yeah, I
bills.
wish my vendors would let me do
We
that.
are more than pleased with the status of the AR report.
Okay.
That works then, I move to approve the bills.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next time.